My name is Dre, and I am from Dragon Consulting. If this is the first visit that you've got to my channel, then welcome, and if you are returning, welcome back. I want to start off by wishing everybody a Happy New Year. It's the first video of 2020, and I figured the best place to start was with key characteristics for meaningful goals. So a number of us are working on setting goals for the upcoming year, the upcoming decade, or in general for life. And we may be wondering, how do we formulate goals that are just right for us? So how do we create things that are not too easy, but also not too difficult, that can help us grow, and that can give us the motivating energy that we need to move forward to achieve those goals? I think it's important that for each of the goals we set, we ensure that we've got some key characteristics covered that will increase our potential to achieve them. So with that said, I did a bit of research and came across two fairly prolific methodologies that most people in consulting and in the healthcare world tend to follow. And those are the 5 principles of effective goal setting, which was brought forth in 1990 in a book called A Theory of Goal Setting and Task Performance by Edwin Locke and Gary Latham. And the second is SMART goals, which many of you will have heard about. And those were outlined in an article in Management Review by T Dohran in 1981. So let's take a bit of a closer look into what these different characteristic or methodologies actually have to say. So the first is the 5 principles of effective goal setting. You can see the 5 of them on your screen here, and we'll jump into what each of them mean. So for clarity, which is the first principle, the goal has to be very clearly defined. It needs some parameters, it has to be specific in nature and have components that are easy to understand and that can be sort of articulated and defined. The second principle is challenge. The goal must present a reasonable form of challenge to the individual that's working towards it. So the goal is something that should be not too simple, so not something that you're going to do on a daily basis anyways, but also not so tedious or so complicated that you actually aren't going to be motivated to continue. So it needs to fit in that sort of golden spot of challenge where it's just difficult enough to push you and have you grow in areas you haven't grown before, but not so complicated it's going to make you want to just throw your hands up in the air and say, I'm done with this. So the third one of these principles is commitment. So there needs to be a level of commitment to achieving the goal. So if you've defined something as a future state that you want to achieve, but you have absolutely no committed intention of working your way towards that, that can't be considered a goal. So it would be more of an idea. A goal is something that you've set out and you or a group of people along with you are committed to actually taking steps to reach that endpoint. The fourth principle is feedback. So it is very important to understand sort of where you are on the path towards achieving the goal. And this goes for individual goals as well as for group goals or organizational goals. So there needs to be some form of feedback cycle in place to let you know if you're working towards the end in a sort of logical fashion, if you're achieving what you set out to achieve, and if there is an intention of you getting to the end. If you aren't sure about where you are on the pathway and there isn't a feedback in place, it can be very difficult to continue moving forward because your motivation tends to wane. So the fifth principle that they have set out is task complexity. So the goal can't be so overwhelming that it's confusing. And in some instances, we've set a goal for ourselves that is sort of very far out there or a high reach type goal. So something that is way outside of our comfort zone and something that's going to push us to sort of grow and move forward in a great way. But we don't want to look at that and say, it's too overwhelming for me, I don't understand it. So the task complexity principle talks about establishing some timelines and some milestones, and to break things down into meaningful paths so that you can actually achieve that feedback, and that it's not something that's overwhelming. So break it down into a level that actually fits with the complexity you need to motivate to move yourself forward. So that's that principle theory. The second one that I want to talk about is SMART goals. So Dohran published the SMART goals idea, like I said, back in 1981, and SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So what do we mean by specific? Similar to the 5 principles, this indicates that a goal needs to be explicit. You need to be able to communicate what the goal is to other people in a way that's clear and defined. It needs to have parameters associated with it, and it needs to have some structure. Measurable, so you need to be able to measure the progress or achievement of the goal. So this again is closely aligned with the other methodology and its feedback loop. So creating something that's ambiguous, that you have no actual idea of how you're going forward, is very, very difficult, if not impossible, to accomplish, because there's nothing to measure against. So the goal needs to be specific and measurable. It also needs to be achievable. So there needs to be something that, with effort put in, an accomplishment can be attained. So it shouldn't be something that is absolutely impossible, that just based on sort of the state of the world today, or sort of where you are in your thought process, in your physical process, something can't be attained. It needs to be achievable. It also shouldn't be set so low that it's not a challenge. So it isn't a very good goal or a strong goal if it's something that there isn't any effort actually required to move forward with it. It's something that is in all likelihood going to happen anyway. That's not something that we would want to define as a goal. Realistic, it needs to be feasible, so it actually needs to be something that, again, has that achievable aspect to it, and it needs to be relevant to the purpose that you've got. So it should be in line with a pathway that you're trying to work your way towards and a growth cycle that you're moving towards. It needs to be realistic with that. So it needs to be aligned, it needs to be something that you can get behind, you can believe in, you can commit to. And it shouldn't remove aspects of a challenge. So again, it can't be something that doesn't create challenge for you. And finally, with SMART, the last one is timely. So it requires a defined timeline. In order for a goal to truly be defined as an achievable goal, it needs to have a start date, and it needs to have some form of target completion date. So the date doesn't have to be a specific calendar day. It can be a period of time, or it can be a range of time, depending on how large the goal is, but it needs to have some sort of end. So if there is a goal set out that has absolutely no end in mind, it's just at some point in your life, chances are there'll be no urgency associated with moving towards that goal, and without that sense of urgency and a time frame to associate with it, you run the risk of feeling unmotivated. So with both of these methodologies, one of the sort of underlying components is that goal setting can help motivate you towards doing things that result in growth, personal growth, organizational growth, growth for both. So there's a couple of elements of motivation that you want to make sure underlying all the goals that you set. And that is direction. So they need to have directionality. You need to have an understanding of what a start point is and what the end point is. So which direction are you actually intending to go, and how you sort of break down that path to get there. There also needs to be intensity. So you need to have an understanding of how much energy you need to put forward in order to move towards the desired outcome. So is it something that is going to require sort of very, very minimal effort but at a regular interval, or is it something that's going to require sort of high intensity effort and thought on a continued basis, things like that. So you need to understand what that energy output looks like. or of an idea. And the final one is duration. So you also have to understand sort of what the urgency and timing is around things, and how much sort of that works towards achieving the goal. So that actually helps with your intensity definitions. Those two kind of go hand in hand. But these are the three elements that are required within a goal to work towards motivation. So now that we've got two of those methodologies forward and we've got an idea of what components need to be there to motivate, we need to sort of dive right in and start going after our goals. So the quote I want to leave you with today is, the trouble with not having a goal is that you can spend your life running up and down the field and never score. If you like what you see, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time.